Stephen Sondheim is considered to be one of the greatest musical theatre composers of the modern age, but it is a name that causes dread amongst pianists and accompanists. And the reason for that is because his music is very, very complex. In particular, it's complex to sight read, even if it's a piece of music that you know. You'd have to be exceptionally good at sight reading to be able to just read it off the cuff. And there are a few reasons for that. The first reason for that is because his piano scores seem to be very heavily based on the orchestration, and the orchestration is very full and very meaty. Now, whether or not Sondheim did his own orchestration, I don't know. I don't really know enough about him and his technique. But the piano arrangements seem to be very, very faithful to them. And the problem that you've got there is there's an awful lot of orchestration going on. I mean, if you think about an orchestra, what you'll have is you might have a low pedal note here, like on the double bass. Your cello might be doing a nice sort of walking bass sort of thing. And then you might got other strings down sort of in this sort of mid-range, might be doing some sort of like off stabs like that. You may get some higher ones, similar things in the woodwinds, so sort of the flutes, so like that, and you might get some counter melody, so like that. There might be all sorts of things going on, and what the scores seem to do is they seem to put them all into one place. So I'm going to have a look at a couple of scores of his and just use them as examples, really, just to show you. The song Sorry Grateful from Company is a great example of this. So if you have a look at the first couple of opening bars of it, I mean, we're already in 6/4, which means it's a little bit sort of awkward to count. Not because it's 6/4, but because we've got those fermatas on there, the pause signs, which means that we've got to now wait for the vocalist to come in, and that could be any time if we're pausing correctly. But what you might notice is that, first of all, and this is not uncommon in Sondheim piano arrangements, is firstly we've got a stretch, we've got octave, we've got a compound major third effectively. A compound interval is basically when we have an interval but it's split up by an octave, so a C to an E is a major third, but we're going C to an E an octave above, which is now a compound major third. Now I've got long fingers, so that's okay. So that would automatically throw a lot of people off. But what we're going to do just for this opening bit is sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, pause it a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, pause. Okay, and what we have to do is use the, as you can see in the bars, is we've got bar 3. The C is being held on as a bit of a pedal note. Now that again would demand a little bit of a stretch, which not everybody can do. Now, this particular song is actually not the worst example that I can use because we can actually use the pedal here. But there are situations whereby if you want to get sort of staccato, which a lot of Sondheim's music is based around that kind of walking bass and vamping chord, you couldn't use the pedal effectively because you'd sort of ruin that jumpiness of a lot of the music. But here it's a bit more flowing, which is good. So if you can't stretch, you could just use the pedal to do all the work for you and just move the hands up the notes. And then we put the second hand in, which is and again we've got stretches there, so we've got F, C up to a G, and then it progresses up to an A. So doing that kind of thing immediately for sight reading is terrifying, to be honest. So if you're an audition pianist, for example, and you get given a Sondheim piece and it's like that, it can be very intimidating. One of the other reasons that I find for Sondheim being very, very difficult is because you can't blag your way through his music. So a lot of the other composers of theatre, such as Frank Wildhorn and Andrew Lloyd Webber, and even some of the older composers, such as Richard Rodgers, for example, You can often blag your way through the music because they tend to use very pleasing to the ear chord structures. Whereas a lot of Sondheim's music is actually based more around riff. So you can't do it in quite the same way. You know, the most you might be able to do is just blag the bass note or something if you're really struggling. But if you take a look at a piece also from Company, another piece of music called Another 100 People, this piece of music is based heavily around a riff. And once you finally master that riff, it's not the end of the world, but to actually read something like that off the back of your hand is not the nicest thing at all. Sondheim is big on using accidentals as well. Now, luckily, that piece of music is in C major, so really the only ones we've got to worry about are a couple of A flats and A naturals there in the opening of that riff. But nonetheless, it's still one of those that the having to jump from down here is quite intimidating because really you want to get it right. They can't be chordified in quite the same way. I mean, possibly you could go or something like that, but it's just not right. It's not the right feel, it's not the right flow, and you want to get the right feel for the person singing it. So, as I say, you can't really blag it. I mean, the odd wrong note in that riff is perhaps inevitable if you're not well rehearsed, or certainly if you're playing it first time around. But basically, that stands for a lot of Sondheim's music. There's a lot of them that are based around riff rather than chords, so to speak. So there's another one in Company, which is Marry Me a Little, which has got the same sort of issue for the sight reader, which is that it's very, very riff based. Another example would be on the steps of the palace from Into the Woods. And so on. But they're not really... You can't really codify it in the same way. If there's anything that I could recommend that you do when you're learning a Sondheim piece, it's to get used to intense ledger lines because they come up an awful lot. Similarly, get used to reading bass clef in the right hand and treble clef in the left hand because that comes up an awful lot as well. And get used also to not just the awkward key signatures like your F sharp, G flat major, but get used to not only accidentals but double sharps and double flats because they crop up a lot. For example, they crop up in this particular piece of music, which is from Follies, Could I Leave You? And if we just have a look at just a couple of the bars here. Something like that. But the thing is, with that particular piece, is it actually goes on and it starts to rise up and do very, very similar things, but very, very quickly and progressively. So really, even if you've got a chance to practice and learn it, you know, the better you can read that kind of music offhand, the better for you. I suppose the main thing with Sondheim's music is just to really brush up on your sight reading and get used to those things. So ledger lines, bass clef in the right, treble clef in the left, flats and sharps anyway as accidentals, awkward key signatures, double sharps and double flats, and also get used to a sort of a technique of, if you can, try and avoid looking at the piano. So try and avoid looking ahead the whole time so that you're not taking your eyes off it. Now that's difficult at the best of times, a difficult habit to get into, but particularly when you're using or playing pieces of music that so heavily rely on jumping from down there to up here with one hand, and they do it quite quickly. Things like that, I just made that up by the way, but things like that, you really want to not take your eyes off the score, because you really want to give that your full concentration and let your hands do what they do naturally anyway. So I mean, that's just really an update on what I'm doing with my life at the moment. I'm learning Sondheim pieces for some for a module, not my module, but to accompany some students for a module, and turns out they all like Sondheim. So there's quite a few pieces going to be added to my repertoire. But the good thing about practicing them and learning them is that if I'm ever given them on the spot in an audition, at least I'll have had some practice. So yeah, enjoy. If it's possible for you to enjoy Sondheim as a pianist, enjoy.